Get away from that board. You think you're qualified to even read it? Regan Kessler grabbed Otis Renner by the sleeve of his faded gray uniform and yanked him back. A janitor, hands still cracked and wet from mopping. She tapped the equation with one manicured nail. This is postgraduate mathematics, not a coloring page. 200 students stared. Someone hit record. Regan crossed her arms and smiled the kind of smile that dares you to breathe. You know what? Solve this, she said, and I'll marry you. The room shook with laughter. What nobody in it knew was that this janitor had been solving equations on that same board every night for 15 years, and tonight, he wasn't going to erase his work. Kingsford University sat on 40 manicured acres in upstate Connecticut. Ivy on the walls, marble in the hallways, a mathematics department ranked 6th in the country. The kind of place where legacy mattered more than logic, and the right last name opened more doors than the right answer. Otis Renner had been mopping those marble floors for 15 years. Every weeknight, he clocked in at 9 and clocked out at 5 in the morning. Same faded gray uniform. Same cart with the squeaky left wheel. He cleaned lecture halls, emptied trash in the faculty lounge, scrubbed coffee rings off desks where tenured professors left them without a second thought. Nobody learned his name. Nobody needed to. To them, he was background noise, a gray shape that moved between rooms and vanished before sunrise. But Otis had a secret. Every night, once the last light in the building went dark, he stood in front of the main lecture hall's whiteboard and solved whatever equation was left on it. It had started 12 years ago. His wife, Naomi, had been a high school math teacher, the kind who stayed after hours for the kid nobody else believed in. She taught him his first equation on a napkin during their second date. He solved it before the coffee arrived. You see numbers, she told him, smiling. The way musicians hear notes. Naomi died 5 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Fast. Cruel. She left behind an 8-year-old daughter named Sadie and a worn leather notebook filled with equations, crossed-out proofs, and one unfinished problem on the last page. Otis never stopped solving. It was how he kept her voice in the room. He never told anyone. He solved it. He erased it. He mopped. Every morning the board was clean, and no one knew the janitor had done in 4 hours what the graduate students couldn't do in 4 weeks. Until Regan Kessler arrived. She'd transferred from a top-tier program the previous fall. 32 years old, a PhD at 25, published in 3 major journals before 30. Kingsford's new department chair, the youngest in the school's history. Fitted dresses. Heels that struck the marble like a metronome. Blonde hair always pinned. Green eyes that measured everyone and found them short. Regan was brilliant. That was never in question. The real question was whether she believed anyone else could be. She'd grown up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, daughter of a federal judge and a corporate attorney. Private schools. Summer programs at elite universities. A world where intelligence had an address and a dress code. People who looked like Otis carried her luggage. They did not carry theorems. In her first week, she posted a challenge to the department board, an unsolved problem in algebraic topology, a $50,000 research grant to whoever cracked it. She announced it at a faculty meeting, sparkling water in hand. This will separate the serious minds from the tourists, she said. I expect submissions from doctoral candidates only. Let's keep the standard where it belongs. Graduate students scrambled. Whiteboards filled across the department. Study groups ran through the night. For 3 weeks, nothing. Then one morning, Regan found handwriting on the main lecture hall's board that she didn't recognize. Neat. Deliberate. 5 lines that approached the problem from an angle none of her students had considered. Not complete, but right. More than right, elegant. She checked the security footage. A man in a gray uniform, mop propped against the wall, standing at the board at 2:14 in the morning, writing, pausing, writing again, for 43 minutes. Otis Renner, the night janitor. Regan didn't see a mind. She saw a uniform. She printed the screenshot, dropped it on the faculty lounge table. We have a janitor, she said, who thinks he's a mathematician. The professors laughed. One of them, Harold Pierce, 65, white-haired, 3 semesters from retirement, did not. He studied the photo in silence. That afternoon, Regan made a decision. She'd bring Otis into the lecture hall, in front of 200 students, not to test him, to make an example of him. She wanted every person in that room to see what happened to someone who stepped outside their place, and remember it. What she hadn't planned for was the chalk. At 8:47 the next morning, a mandatory attendance email went out. By 9:55, the room was packed. 200 seats filled, students on the steps, teaching assistants against the back wall. The board still held Otis's 5 unfinished lines. Regan hadn't erased them. She wanted them visible. At 10:01, the side door opened. Otis walked in, gray uniform, mop in hand, told only that it was a facilities matter. He had no idea 200 people were waiting. Everyone, Regan said, this is Otis Renner. He cleans this building, mops the floors, empties your trash. A pause. And apparently, he also does our homework. Laughter rippled through the hall. Mr. Renner. She stepped toward him. Did you write this? Otis nodded once. With what qualification exactly? A GED? A night school certificate? Or just a mop and a dream? More laughter. A student aimed her phone. Otis said nothing. His jaw tightened. His cracked fingers gripped the mop handle until his knuckles went pale. Regan turned to the room. This is what happens when boundaries are ignored. When proximity gets confused with ability. She tapped the board. Being near genius doesn't make you one. She let it settle, then uncapped a marker and wrote a new equation beneath his. Longer, denser, layered with notation that made front-row grad students lean forward and squint. Solve this, she said, turning back to him, taking in the uniform, the wet shoes, the calloused hands. Solve this, and I'll marry you. The room detonated. Students grabbed each other's arms. Phones came out everywhere. Otis stared at the equation the way a pianist's fingers hover before the first note, not reading it, listening to it. He set the mop against the wall, walked past Regan, close enough that she stepped back, picked up the chalk, and began to write. The first line landed clean, confident, a direction nobody in the room expected. Regan's smile flickered. By the third line, the laughter had gone quiet. By the fifth, a grad student in the front row whispered to the person beside him, "He's right." Otis's chalk moved in straight, measured lines. No hesitation, the way someone walks through their own dark house from pure memory. The first 2 lines mirrored Regan's framework exactly. Then, on the third, he stopped. Circle the term. A small variable substitution she'd made without comment, the kind of move every student in the room had copied into their notes without question. He drew a line through it. Rewrote it, slow, deliberate. "What are you doing?" Regan demanded. "This doesn't hold." He tapped the circled term. "You assumed continuity across the boundary. But the function isn't continuous there. It has a removable discontinuity on this interval. Everything after this point is built on that assumption." He looked at her, steady. "Which means everything after this point is wrong." The room went still. "That," Regan said carefully, "is a standard transformation. It's in every textbook." "It is. And it works when the boundary conditions are symmetric. Yours aren't. You changed the domain in step 2, but kept the original boundary. That breaks the substitution." He wrote 3 clean lines beneath the correction. Tight, precise, a lock clicking open. A tall grad student, Thomas Kilburn, who'd spent 2 weeks stuck on this exact problem, flipped back through his notebook, finger tracing the page. His eyes widened. "He's right," he said. Not loud. Loud enough. It spread like a crack through glass. 2 more students checked. Then 5. Then the whole front row was flipping pages, whispering, comparing. "Professor Kessler," Thomas said, "I ran into the same wall last week. I thought it was my error. It was the framework." Regan's eyes went cold. "The framework is correct, Mr. Kilburn. I published it." "You published it with symmetric boundaries," Otis said quietly. "This problem doesn't have them." Silence. Regan crossed to the board, heels striking the floor in sharp, deliberate steps, and stood close enough to Otis that the contrast became its own kind of display. Fitted dress beside faded uniform, perfume beside floor cleaner. She studied his corrections for 11 long seconds. "I left that error intentionally," she said, voice steady, hand gripping the podium edge. "It was a test, to see if any of you would catch it." Nobody believed her. Thomas closed his notebook. A teaching assistant in the back shook his head, barely, but enough. Regan turned back to Otis, taking in the cracked hands, the frayed collar, the calm, unreadable face. "You got lucky. One error doesn't make you a mathematician." "No, ma'am," Otis said. "It doesn't." He set the chalk down, picked up his mop, and turned for the door. "Professor Kessler," said a voice from the back row. Harold Pierce, still seated, hands folded in his lap. For the record, I reviewed your published framework last spring. I flagged the same discontinuity in my own notes. I assumed you'd catch it in revision. A pause. You didn't. The room exhaled. Regan's face went white, not with embarrassment. With fury. She looked at Harold like he'd betrayed her. He didn't flinch. He looked at Otis instead, and for the first time all morning, someone in that room looked at the janitor without pity, without amusement. With recognition. Otis walked out. The hallway was empty. His footsteps echoed on the marble. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. But for the first time in 15 years, his hands weren't shaking. Regan didn't sleep that night. Alone in her third-floor office, 2 floors above where Otis was mopping, she replayed the lecture on a loop. The circled error, the silence, Harold's voice, Thomas Kilburn saying he's right. By morning, it had already spread across campus. A freshman posted about it with no names attached. Our math department chair got fact-checked by the cleaning guy and told the whole class it was on purpose, for 100 shares by noon. At 2 p.m., Regan called a meeting with the dean of faculty, Richard Bellamy, a man who'd run the college for 12 years and preferred problems that solved themselves quietly. I want to formalize the challenge, she said. The open problem, the one on the board. Give him a formal deadline. 2 weeks. He solves the full equation in front of the faculty committee, or he's terminated for unauthorized use of academic facilities. Bellamy raised an eyebrow. He corrected a substitution error. Regan, that's not a crime. He accessed restricted materials, tampered with department property, misrepresented himself. If we let this slide, anyone off the street plays professor. Bellamy studied her for a long moment, then sighed. 2 weeks. If he solves it, the grant is his, same terms as anyone else. And Regan, this stays academic. No theatrics. She agreed. She had no intention of keeping that promise. The next morning, Otis found a formal letter in his locker. University letterhead. 2 paragraphs. He was invited, the word doing heavy lifting, to present a complete solution before the faculty committee in 14 days. Solve it, and he'd receive the grant. Fail, or decline, and his employment would be reviewed for misuse of university resources. He read it twice, folded it, put it in his back pocket. That evening, Sadie did homework across the kitchen table while macaroni cooled on the stove. The letter lay flat between them. Daddy, what's that? A math problem. Is it hard? He looked at her. 8 years old. Naomi's eyes, Naomi's stubbornness. Yeah, baby. It's hard. Harder than Mom's. He almost smiled. Maybe. Sadie picked her pencil back up. Mom said hard problems just mean you need more paper. He folded the letter again. He wasn't doing this for the money. He wasn't doing it to prove Regan wrong. He was doing it because Naomi had written this same equation on the last page of her notebook before she got sick. She never finished it. He would. The campus paper ran at front page the next day. Department chair challenges janitor to solve 30-year-old math problem. Otis's grainy employee badge photo beside Regan's polished faculty portrait. The comments section split fast, inspiring, a stunt, cruel, depending on who you asked. A betting pool went up on a student forum. 15-1 against him. What none of them knew, what Regan herself didn't know, was that the problem she'd posted wasn't just difficult. It was a variant of the Ferris-Lund conjecture, unsolved for 3 decades by every mathematician who'd taken a run at it. She'd chosen it deliberately. The one problem she was certain no one could touch, especially not a janitor. That night, in his cramped apartment, Otis opened Naomi's leather notebook to the last page. Her handwriting filled the margins, small, certain, closer than anyone had ever known. He picked up a pencil, the same worn yellow number 2 she'd always used, and started where she'd left off. Day 1, 2 hours studying her approach. She'd worked the Ferris-Lund problem without ever knowing its formal name. Found it in a library book, copied it down the way someone copies a poem they can't stop thinking about. Her method was unconventional, sideways, almost naive, coming at it through combinatorics instead of the standard topology framework. And she'd gotten further than most published mathematicians ever had. She'd stopped on step 4. A note in the margin. Asterisk need access to the research archive. Ask O to check. Asterisk. She never asked. She got sick 3 weeks later. Otis closed the notebook, picked up his pencil, and began. Day 3. The The first steps came fast. Adjacent structures he'd already worked through on that whiteboard over years of solving other people's unfinished proofs. His hands knew the notation the way a carpenter's hands know a joint. For 13 nights, Otis mopped floors until 5, drove home, kissed Sadie's forehead while she slept, and sat at the kitchen table with Naomi's notebook open beside his own pages. He didn't tell anyone at Kingsford what he was doing. He didn't need to. Regan had already told the entire department it was impossible. On the 14th day, he walked into the faculty committee room in a clean shirt instead of the gray uniform, carrying a stack of paper thick enough that Dean Bellamy actually sat up straighter when he set it down. Regan sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, certain this would be over in 10 minutes. It wasn't. Otis worked through the proof step by step, the same unhurried rhythm he'd used at that whiteboard 2 weeks earlier. No notes, no hesitation. Every line building on the last like something that had always been inevitable and simply needed someone patient enough to write it down. When he reached the point where Naomi's notebook had stopped, the exact place she'd written "need access to the archive" in the margin, he paused for the first time. Then he kept going, using the one thing she'd never had access to: 15 years of quiet, uncredited practice on a whiteboard nobody thought anyone was watching. Harold Pierce, sitting near the back with the same folded hands from the lecture hall, was the first to set down his pen. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's the whole proof." Nobody laughed this time. Regan didn't speak for a long time after the committee's verification came back. When she finally did, it wasn't the speech anyone expected. "I chose that problem because I thought it was unbeatable," she said, mostly to the table, not to Otis. "I wasn't testing your ability. I was testing whether the room would let me be wrong about you." It did for a while. She didn't apologize exactly, but she didn't correct anyone who later called it an apology, either. The $50,000 grant went to Otis Renner, night custodian, under his own name, with a footnote in the published paper that read, simply, "In memory of Naomi Renner, who found this problem first." He kept his job at Kingsford for another year, mopping the same halls on the same schedule, until the department, quietly, without a press release this time, offered him a lecturer's position teaching an introductory course 2 mornings a week. He took it on the condition that he could keep the night shift too, at least until Sadie was old enough not to need someone home when she woke up. The whiteboard in the main lecture hall stayed clean every morning after that, the same as it always had. But everyone in that building knew, now, exactly whose hands had been keeping it that way.